the Dallas Cowboys are obviously at the front of all national headlines on a week-to-week basis. And this week, coming out with a lot of, you could say, animosity to some degree towards the Cowboys for what was a very embarrassing performance on none other than Jerry Jones's birthday, of course, as well. So, a little bit of extra storylines there, but this was just a dismantling of the Cowboys, who I think that this is at a point where, I think that this was a very eye-opening game for a lot of the public. We've been saying on this show for the past handful of weeks that the Cowboys are not that good of a team. And this is a situation where we have seen them sort of hang in the mix thanks to a couple wins in these past 2 weeks against the Steelers and the Giants. Neither one of those teams, I think, are particularly great. And this was a moment where they are dealing with a number of different crucial injuries that is important to take into consideration. But that being said, if the Cowboys were going to have a chance to be one of the teams to beat in the NFC, they had to at least be competitive in this game. And that was so far from the case. The Lions end up winning 47-9. And we are going to dive into the Lions more specifically because I think that there is a ton of positives and we do have to give them credit for being on the winning side of a blowout game like this, something that obviously for a decade or so prior to last season really was not in the regular repertoire of the Lions. They were the ones facing these brutal losses, and now they are on top. So again, we're going to dive into the Lions along with the rest of the NFC North. But I do want to just talk about where we are at with the Cowboys, because this was, like I mentioned, a brutal performance from them, really from both sides of the ball. And I think it's really interesting specifically to focus on just this idea of the Cowboys playing at home, because that was such a big storyline during the regular season last year when they were, for the longest time, undefeated at home. Their offense specifically was firing on all cylinders, one of the highest scoring units in the league when playing at home. And we have just come so far from that, really going back to that loss against the Packers in the NFC wildcard game last year, where it has just been sort of bad performance after bad performance. And again, Dak Prescott 100% deserves blame in this game. 17 of 33, 178 yards and 2 interceptions. A really bad game from him. I also think it goes so far beyond just him at this point when you take into consideration the fact that they are very much limited from a talent perspective outside of the wide receiver one position. CeeDee Lamb is still an excellent player. He ends up mostly showing up in this game, but ultimately they're just so one-dimensional. And especially against a tough defensive front like the Detroit Lions, we can see the very clear shortcomings of that offensive line that have continued to be an issue for them throughout the course of this season. Of course, the fact that they don't exactly have a true running back one either to take on the workload. I believe Ezekiel Elliott, it was within these past couple weeks, it might have been last week, I can double check here, but he finished, it was a few weeks ago against the Ravens specifically is what I was thinking about, when he finished the game with just 3 carries. Since then, it has been 5, 6, and 8, so he's getting a little bit more touches, and yet he is still top 20 yards rushing since week 1. And I think that that's just a huge concern for the Cowboys. Now, obviously, part of this does ultimately come back around to Dak Prescott, because the reality of the situation is when you are somebody who gets paid so much money, you are expected to overcome some of the other shortcomings on the roster, which is something that, again, very important to take into consideration when you're talking about dishing out these big-time contracts. And really, I wouldn't say none of. We're probably about 50-50 now, I would say 6 weeks into the season, in terms of how well some of these big quarterback contracts that were given out this offseason have aged. You look at Jared Goff, after having a slow start to the season, he has sort of, been able to rectify that and has been playing really good football as of late. And again, maybe we should save this for a little bit for later, but Jordan Love as well with the Packers, now that he's back and fully healthy, I think that they are only going to be on an upwards trajectory for the remainder of this season. And then on the other hand, it's probably even more so 40-60 in terms of good to bad, because you have Dak Prescott, who, again, I don't think that he's solely responsible for the Cowboys not being as good as they are, but, he definitely has not been playing well this season for the most part. And you also have Tua Tagovailoa, different situation there with the injuries, but of course still not aging great. And you have Trevor Lawrence as well, who ended up putting up another bit of a stinker, I suppose. I still think it's more so about the Jaguars as a team that hasn't aged quite as well, but that's a whole different conversation that maybe we'll dive into later this week. But again, Dak is sort of on the I wouldn't say hot seat necessarily. He just locked down his job security. So, that's not to that extent, but he is somebody who is going to take on a lot of the blame for this Cowboys team. And that's totally fair, but like I mentioned, that offensive line in the run game is non-existent for them up to this point in the year. You look at their defense as well, and, I guess the Cowboys a little bit of credit for holding the Steelers under 100 rushing yards the week prior. They had limited to the Giants to under 30. So those were at least steps in the right direction. But when we've seen the Cowboys at their worst, it's against opposing teams that have a clear identity, and that is running the ball. And that's what the Lions were able to do in this game. Ultimately, it helped the fact that the Lions didn't really feel all that much pressure from the other side of the ball, that the Cowboys weren't putting on points, but just ground and pound. That's the name of the game for this Lions team. It was David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs just taking turns and running all over this Cowboys defense. The Lions as a whole totaled 184 yards on the ground, another 308 through the air. This Cowboys defense, and they are dealing with a significant number of injuries right now. Again, it is important to keep that in mind in terms of if they are able to stay alive in this season, there are reinforcements coming. I just don't think it's going to be enough. And at that point, by the time that they are available, are the Cowboys even still going to be in the playoff picture is another huge question for them. So I think it would be irresponsible to fully write off the Cowboys for dead right now. They are playing in a division that is still winnable through these first 6 games. The Eagles end up pulling off a win against the Browns yesterday as well. That game wasn't really convincing whatsoever. The Commanders, and we're going to be diving a little bit more specifically into the Commanders later in this show, they put up a good fight against the Ravens, but they did end up losing, and I do think that there are still some pretty blatant shortcomings with that Commanders team. Again, not to dump all over them. They're 4-2. They're having an excellent start to the season that I do want to give them credit for. But that being said, I don't think that they are, head and shoulders necessarily above the Cowboys. I would, at this point, moving forward here, probably say that the Cowboys are the 3rd best team in the division, but they are still very much in the mix, and these are teams that are all going to play one another. So, should be really interesting to see overall there. But I do want to talk about the Lions as well, of course, and sort of help lead us into this conversation about the NFC North, because they have been firing on another gear as of these past few weeks. And it's because I think they are sort of circling back. Really, it's the past 2 weeks that their offense has taken it to the next level, but it's the fact that they are fully embracing who they are, and that is a team that can ground and pound and work you from the trenches, and it's helped them to just control these games as a whole. I understand in terms of football coverage, running the ball isn't the sexiest thing at this point, but especially with how you've seen opposing defenses in the NFL these past couple years sort of make these adjustments, that it is sort of, if the defenses are going to give it to you, you have to take it. And that's why I think the Lions are so brilliantly built up to this point, because of the fact that it starts on the line of scrimmage, and then from there, it adds these extra elements to the passing game as well, that you have a successful play action in front of you as well, which is something that Jared Goff, even dating back to his time with the Rams, when it was him and Todd Gurley in the backfield together, that was a massive part of when he was able to shine. And he's taken a lot of steps from there as well now, that now he can just straight up drop back and hurt you down the field. But there is that extra level to it when opposing defenses are so scared of your run game. And you see starting center Frank Ragnow come back for the Lions this week, and now we're going back-to-back games where they have been able to dominate that line of scrimmage, which is so crucial, I think, to the overall functionality of this offense. And then on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, give them their props. Are the Cowboys a flawed team? Absolutely. But you have a number of these secondary members really making a name for themselves right now. I think that the standout of that group, at least, from this game and overall in terms of my expectations for the Lions, second-year safety Brian Branch has just been such an incredible add for them. Taken in day 2 of the 2023 draft, he has the combination of coverage skills. He can come up and make plays in the run game as well, where he ended up having a couple interceptions in this game as well. And I just think that secondary really is rounding out to where it needs to be. But of course, if we're talking about the Lions defense, you have to also mention the fact that superstar edge rusher Aiden Hutchinson did leave this game with a fractured tibia, which entirely changes sort of what we can expect out of their defense. It is just one player, but their best player on that side of the ball. And, you have to feel great about the Lions as a whole now, but this is a very scary situation for the Lions, who already feel like they were trying to make up some ground, at least to some degree, on the defensive side of the ball, and they suffer a blow like this. So Lions, lot to be happy about from this game. That, of course, is a brutal loss. So I want to talk about where the Lions currently stand as a team overall, understanding what this injury could do for their overall season outlook. So we're going to talk about how they match up against the other NFC North teams that, as a collective, went 3-0 yesterday. So we are going to be diving into that. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.